Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
My name is Martin, and what I'm about to share happened in the Great Smoky Mountains about 5 months ago, and it came down partly to carelessness and partly to something closer to bad judgment. It didn't happen directly to me in the way you might expect, but it involved me enough that I feel like it's worth telling, especially if it helps someone else take certain things more seriously. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys climbing, camping, and spending time outdoors. It's something I've done for years. Even though I'm not from the Appalachian region, I grew up around forests, so I'm used to the kinds of rules that come with being in those environments. I won't say I believe every story you hear about the woods, but there are enough things that don't have clear explanations to make you think twice. Around that time, I had planned one of those short trips I like to take every now and then. Nothing extreme, just a few days away, and I had already booked a cabin in the Smokies. I was planning to bring my dog, Greggy, like I usually do. He's used to it, and he handles those environments better than most people I know. The thing is, I'm 20, and I still live with my parents, so I'm in that phase where I want my independence, but I don't have the financial stability to fully move out yet, which means there's always some level of compromise involved. When I mentioned the trip at home, my mom immediately suggested that I take my cousin with me. He's 18, but he's had a rough time. He's repeated a few years in school, gets into trouble often, and a lot of that comes from the situation at home. His parents argue constantly, and it's the kind of environment that affects you whether you realize it or not. I grew up with him, so I know him well, and while I care about him, he has a tendency to act without thinking, to push boundaries just to see what happens, and in a place like that, that kind of behavior can get you into serious trouble. Still, he's always looked at me in a way that's hard to explain, almost like I'm someone he listens to more than others, like an older brother figure, even though we're close in age. So, when my mom insisted, I agreed, but I made it very clear from the start that if he was coming with me, there were rules, and not the kind you can ignore when you feel like it. I told him that I would be the one making decisions out there, that if I said something needed to be done, it wasn't up for debate, and that the reason for that wasn't control, it was safety. He agreed without much resistance, and I could tell he genuinely wanted to get out of the house for a while, given how things had been going with his parents, so for once, he didn't argue. The first couple of days actually went better than I expected. We settled into a routine quickly. During the day, we'd go out for hikes, nothing too intense, just enough to explore the area. And in the evenings, we'd cook outside on a small stove I had brought with me, then spend some time talking or playing cards before turning in. Greggy stayed close the entire time, like he always does, calm, alert, never straying too far. It felt normal, almost surprisingly so, and I remember thinking that maybe bringing him along had been a good idea after all, that maybe he just needed a break from everything else. But like I said earlier, there were rules, and I made sure he knew them from the beginning. The kind of rules people who spend time in those mountains tend to pass along. Don't respond if you hear your name called from somewhere you can't see. Once it gets dark, you stay inside. You lock everything, keep the lights low, and you don't go wandering around outside for no reason. He knew all of this. We had gone over it more than once, and at least on the surface, he didn't seem to take issue with any of it. This happened on the third day. It was already dark. We had closed everything up, shutters in place, door locked. And I was in the shower when I thought I heard something. It sounded like the front door opening. Not loudly, not violently, just enough to catch my attention. I paused for a second, trying to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Then I rushed a bit, finished up quickly, and called out to my cousin, asking what he was doing. There was no response, no movement, no voice, nothing at all. I stayed there for a moment longer, trying to listen, holding still, focusing on every small sound. But there was nothing. I was finishing up, drying off as quickly as I could, already feeling that something wasn't right, when I heard it. A whistle, short, clear, close enough that there was no mistaking it. That was the exact moment my body tensed. It wasn't just the sound itself, it was the certainty that came with it. I knew that whistle had come from my cousin, and I had made it very clear before we even arrived that this was one of the things we did not do. We don't respond to whistles, and we don't make them, not out there, not at night, not under any circumstances. Combined with what I thought I had heard earlier, the door opening, the idea that it might actually be open now hit me all at once, and I didn't stop to think. I didn't even get dressed properly. I just grabbed a towel, stepped out, and rushed downstairs as fast as I could. When I reached the bottom, I saw it immediately. The front door was open. I ran toward it, trying to understand what was happening, calling out for my cousin. And then I saw him coming out from the edge of the forest, saying he was a bit concerned because he had opened the door to let my dog out, and now he wasn't coming back. I can't fully explain the feeling that hit me at that moment, but anyone who has a pet will understand it. It was instant panic. I called out for Greggy, and I heard him, not barking normally, but making a sound that was closer to distress, something strained, something wrong. I didn't hesitate. I ran back inside, grabbed the firearm I had brought with me, and went straight toward where I had heard him. I found him on the ground, lying still, with a deep cut across his leg. At the same time, I had the sense that something was very close to us, something just out of sight, but there was no time to process it. I picked him up immediately and ran back toward the cabin, shouting at my cousin to get inside. We got in, shut the door, and locked everything. By then, he had already realized the situation he had put us in. He kept apologizing over and over, saying he knew he had made a mistake. I didn't respond to that, not because I didn't hear him, but because I knew I was too angry to say anything useful in that moment, and there were more urgent things to deal with. I focused on getting the first aid kit and doing whatever I could for Greggy. We had no way of leaving right then, no quick access to a vet, so all I could do was try to stabilize him as best as possible and hope we could get him proper help in the morning. The wound was bad, deeper than anything I had dealt with before, and it was hard not to think about how much worse it could have been. It couldn't have been more than 15 minutes after we got inside when something hit the cabin door with a level of force that made the entire structure shake. In that instant, it was clear that whatever was outside was trying to break it down. I couldn't tell if it was an animal or a person. There was no way to know, but the intent was obvious. Acting on instinct, I fired a shot upward, not aiming at anything, just trying to create enough noise to scare it off, whether it was human or not. Right after that, I told my cousin to help me move the sofa, and we pushed it against the door, adding whatever we could to reinforce it. We checked the windows quickly, made sure everything was secured, and then stayed inside, blocked in, waiting. Throughout the night, we heard repeated impacts against the cabin. Not constant, but enough to make it clear that whatever was out there hadn't left. There were also sounds moving around the structure, pacing, shifting position, always just beyond what we could see. We had no signal, no way to call for help, no one nearby who could hear us. My cousin was in full panic at that point, barely able to stay still, and Greggy was getting weaker, his breathing more shallow as time went on. I don't think I've ever been more afraid of losing him than I was that night. Eventually, around 6 in the morning, the noise stopped. Not gradually, just gone. We waited anyway, about an hour, making sure it wasn't coming back, listening carefully before making any decision. When I was certain it had been quiet long enough, I told my cousin to grab everything he could carry, and we moved. I picked Greggy up and held him as carefully as I could, and we ran straight to the car. We didn't look back, didn't stop, just got in and drove out of there as fast as possible. Once we were out, we contacted the authorities immediately, explained everything, told them there was something in that area with enough strength to damage a structure like that. They told us it likely fell under wildlife jurisdiction and directed us to the park rangers. When I spoke to them, they said there hadn't been any reports of large animals in that specific area that could cause that kind of damage, but they would still look into it. The owner of the cabin was also informed. He was understanding, said nothing like that had ever happened before, and refunded the stay without any issue. Greggy survived. He still has a large scar on his leg to this day. The vet couldn't say exactly what caused the wound, only that it resembled something like a claw mark, but also mentioned that if it had been something like a bear or a mountain lion, the chances of survival would have been much lower. We never found out what it was. Later on, I had a proper conversation with my cousin. He apologized again, said he knew he had made a mistake. I asked him why he opened the door, and he told me Greggy had been acting restless, stressed, and he assumed he needed to go outside. He didn't think any of the warnings really mattered, didn't believe anything could actually happen. Since then, I've talked about this with a few people, and one comment in particular has stayed with me. Someone said that maybe whatever was out there wasn't trying to take the dog at all, that maybe it was using him to draw one of us outside. I don't know if that's true. I only know it's not something I've been able to forget. My name's Dustin. I'm 18, and even though I should probably be done with school by now, I failed a couple of years along the way, so I'm still stuck there while most people I grew up with have already moved on. What I'm about to tell you happened just a few weeks ago in a part of the Appalachian Mountains I've known almost my entire life. My parents own a small cabin out there, nothing fancy, just something they've held on to for years because it means a lot to them. And because of that, I grew up spending a lot of time in those woods. Enough to know the trails, the shortcuts, the areas where you can move fast, and the ones where you really shouldn't. I still live with them, so I follow their rules more than I'd like to admit. But every now and then, I need space, and the cabin has always been that place for me. The problem is, they also know exactly what I tend to do when I'm out there alone, and they weren't too happy about the idea of me going this time. We had been arguing more than usual, nothing extreme, just the kind of tension that builds up when you're trying to have your independence while still living under someone else's roof, and they were pretty clear about not wanting me out there unsupervised. However, as always, I found a way around it. I told them I had something going on with rugby, that I'd been selected for a short training thing and needed to be away for a couple of days. It wasn't convincing, not really, but it was enough, and I'm not proud of it, but it worked. In reality, I packed my stuff and headed straight to the cabin, planning to spend 3 days there, just disconnect, do my own thing, and not deal with anyone. Only 3 people knew I was going. That's important, and it's something I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. Even though the cabin is comfortable enough, I've always preferred sleeping outside. It's something I got used to over the years, and it just feels better, less confined, more natural. So instead of staying inside, I set up my tent a bit further out, not too far. Just enough that I could still see the cabin clearly, but hidden well enough in the brush that you wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. I don't like being exposed in open clearings, never have, so I picked a spot where the terrain and the vegetation did most of the work for me. From there, I had a clear view of the cabin, the porch, the windows, everything. But I was covered on all sides. That night, everything felt normal. I had eaten, settled in, and was just lying inside the tent playing on my Nintendo, something simple to pass the time. It must have been around late evening and already fully dark when something shifted. I didn't notice it right away, it was subtle, but then I caught it, a light turning on inside the cabin. My body just shut down for a second. I knew for a fact I hadn't left anything on. I had double-checked before heading to the tent, and more importantly, no one else was supposed to be there. I had no idea how anyone had managed to get inside the cabin. I'm always careful with that kind of thing. I double-check everything before I leave, doors, windows, anything that could be used as an entry point. It didn't make sense. The only explanation that crossed my mind was that it had to be someone who had been there with me before, someone who already knew the weak spots. Every now and then, I used to throw small parties out there. Nothing too crazy, at least not at first. But even when you invite people you trust, they tend to bring others along, and after a while you lose track of who's who. Things would get a bit out of hand sometimes, and looking back, it's not that hard to believe that someone might have been paying more attention than they should have. I stayed completely still, staring through the small opening of the tent, trying to make sense of it, when I saw movement. 2 figures approached from the side of the cabin, moving with purpose, not hesitating, not looking around like they were lost. At the same time, someone inside opened the front door and let them in. I had no idea who they were. They were all dressed in black, and their faces were covered with something dark as well, masks or fabric. I couldn't tell exactly from where I was. There was nothing distinctive about them. Nothing I could use to place them. Even the way they moved didn't give me anything useful. Their posture, their build, the way they carried themselves, it all just blended together in a way that made it impossible to recognize anyone. I kept trying to match something I was seeing to someone I knew, but there was nothing there to grab onto, no detail that made sense of it. Just shapes moving in the dark without any identity I could attach to them. My chest tightened in a way I can't really explain. It wasn't panic right away. It was something colder and more focused. I lowered the brightness on my screen immediately and shifted closer to the ground, making sure there was no light spilling out of the tent. I kept watching, trying to understand what I was dealing with, when one of them came back outside. He stepped onto the porch, holding something in his hand, and as he moved a little further out, I could see it clearly. It was a baseball bat. Then he said my name. Not loud, not shouting, just calling it out like he knew I was close, like he wasn't guessing. That was the moment everything stopped being uncertain. They weren't there by chance, and they weren't just breaking into the cabin. They were there for me. I didn't wait. I didn't try to grab everything or think it through. I took what I could reach without making noise. My phone, a small flashlight, and the essentials, and left everything else behind. I eased my way out of the tent, keeping low, using the terrain to stay out of sight, and once I had enough distance between me and that clearing, I started moving faster. Not toward the car. Going that way would mean taking a longer route, and if they knew me well enough to call my name, there was a good chance they knew where I usually parked. I wasn't going to risk running straight into them. Instead, I headed in the opposite direction, into thicker forest, toward a route I knew would eventually lead me to one of the nearby small towns. It's not exactly close, about an hour and a half if you keep a steady pace, but I knew I could make it. I grew up in those woods, and even in the dark, I could read enough of the terrain to keep moving without getting lost. Luckily, this was one of the first things my parents had ever taught me. If I ever got lost in the woods, or if something happened and I needed help, I was supposed to make my way as fast as I possibly could to the nearest town. At first, I tried to stay quiet, moving fast, but also controlled. But after a few minutes, I heard something behind me. Not close, but not far either. That was enough. I picked up the pace, pushing through branches, uneven ground, not caring about the noise anymore. My only focus was distance. Every now and then, I thought I heard movement, maybe more than one person, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to confirm it. Time felt strange during that run. It could have been 20 minutes or an hour. I honestly don't know. But eventually the forest started to thin out, and I recognized where I was. When I finally reached the outskirts of the town, I didn't slow down until I saw lights from houses, until I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I went straight to a place where I knew someone would be, knocked harder than I ever have in my life. And when they opened the door, I must have looked completely out of it. I tried to explain, but it came out in pieces. Luckily, it was one of my closest friends who lived there, and I knew he stayed up late. I also knew he wouldn't hesitate to open the door for me. We ended up deciding that, whether my parents found out or not, the best thing to do was call the police. Those 3 men knew I was going to be there alone, which also meant they knew where I studied, where I lived, and the routes I usually took to get around. If they wanted to, they could easily have caught me somewhere else. As I said at the beginning, this all happened just a few weeks ago, and what stayed with me isn't just what happened out there. It's the part that comes before it. Only 3 people knew I was going to that cabin. 3 people I've known for years, people I trusted without thinking twice. I keep going over it in my head, trying to find another explanation, something that makes more sense. But I can't. And that's the part that scares me more. I made it out. Nothing happened to me physically, and I know it could have been a lot worse if I had hesitated even a little. But ever since that night, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that this wasn't random, and that whoever was out there didn't just stumble onto that cabin. They went there knowing I would be there. And they're probably still looking for ways to get me.